He embarrassed her in open court, called her a nobody, right to her face, in front of a full gallery. Then she calmly reached inside her blazer, pulled out a federal badge, and placed him under arrest. "You're a nobody in uniform. Sit down." That's exactly what Judge Warren Belridge said. No pause. No hesitation. No shame. The room had gone still. Not quiet, still. Officer Tiana Mosley stood motionless at the witness stand, hands clasped loosely in front of her, lips parted just slightly. Shock was there, but not loud. It was thick, like the air had gotten heavier. A woman on the jury blinked hard and shifted in her seat. A young man in the back row looked down at his shoes. Tiana said nothing. Not yet. Her eyes locked with the judge's, steady, unshaken, not confrontational, but firm. Belridge leaned back in his chair, smug behind thick glasses, sipping water like he hadn't just dismissed a black female officer in the middle of a civil rights case. This was Courtroom 6B in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The trial was about Raylan Cross, a teenager pulled over, dragged from his car, and roughed up by two local officers, one with prior complaints. A video of the incident had gone viral. Tiana wasn't on the original case. She'd been called to testify based on her internal department work and previous reports involving the same officers. She hadn't spoken more than 3 sentences before Judge Belridge cut her off. The prosecutor, Jenna Kessler, young, sharp, and unshaken, rose fast. "Your Honor, Officer Mosley has every right to testify." Belridge shut her down. "Not if she's here to grandstand with second-hand claims and no legal standing. I don't care what uniform she wears. She's not credible." The courtroom didn't gasp, but it may as well have. The mood shifted, palpable and sharp. A black officer, publicly humiliated, in the middle of testimony about racial profiling. Tiana didn't move, didn't even blink. She stood there holding a kind of silent strength they don't teach at the academy. Then, her voice calm and steady, she asked, "Are you saying my words don't matter because of what I wear, or because of who I am?" The judge scoffed. "You may step down." But Tiana didn't move, not right away. Silence. Heavy and absolute. She stepped down slowly, never breaking eye contact. She didn't look defeated, didn't look angry. She looked in control. Belridge shifted in his seat, tapped a finger on the desk. He was irritated, and for a flicker of a second, nervous. She saw it. So did Jenna. So did the court officer posted at the sidewall. Tiana walked past the prosecutor's table and into the gallery, head high. The judge tried to resume the hearing. Next witness. But before anyone stood, Tiana turned. She reached into her blazer and pulled out a leather case. She flipped it open. The federal badge inside gleamed unmistakably. "My name is Tiana Mosley," she said clearly. This time her voice filled the room. "Senior investigator, United States Department of Justice, Internal Affairs Division." Someone in the jury let out a breath they didn't know they were holding. The judge's expression cracked. Tiana stepped forward. Not close, just enough. "As of this morning, Judge Warren Belridge, you are under federal investigation. And by the authority granted to me, you are now under arrest." The room went cold. You can't do this," Belridge stammered. The arrogance had drained from his voice. "You're being charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy to falsify court records, and accepting unlawful bribes," she said, unwavering. "You have the right to remain silent." The courtroom stood frozen in a moment that flipped history on its head. The woman he just dismissed as a nobody had arrested the most powerful man in the room. And the whispers started. Who is she? Not someone who chased headlines. Not the type to post selfies in uniform. If you passed her on West Jefferson walking her pit mix, Ruby, you'd think she was a quiet, well-mannered woman with good posture and sharp eyes. But those who truly knew Tiana knew this. She didn't do noise. She did work. Born in Evansville, Indiana, she was the middle of 3 daughters. Her mother, Denise, worked nights in elder care. Her father, Clarence, hauled freight cross-country. They didn't have much, but they had rules. Do right, even when no one's watching, her mother used to say. Tiana didn't grow up dreaming of a badge. She once wanted to teach high school history. But that changed the day her older sister got shoved and cuffed by 2 officers at a party for nothing. She saw then how systems protect the wrong people, how power hides behind policy. She joined the force not to wear a badge, but to change what the badge meant. 10 years later, her name was whispered by rookies who wanted to know who to look up to. She wasn't loud. Her record spoke for her. 0 use of force complaints. Solid casework. known for sitting longer with victims, known for filing the reports others buried. But it was in her 5th year that she realized reform from the inside wasn't enough. The turning point, a South Bend case. A black teenager named Byron sentenced to 8 years for a petty theft that should have been probation. Tiana testified the arrest report didn't add up, but the judge dismissed her. Same judge, Warren Belridge. That day, she walked out with a promise clenched behind her teeth. She started collecting patterns, names, reports, signatures, altered documents, missing evidence, misaligned sentences, always hurting the same kinds of people, always rubber-stamped by the same judge. She took night classes, connected with federal agents, quiet ones working on judicial corruption. Then came a call. Agent Corey Delgado, DOJ. He'd been watching Belridge for years, but they needed someone inside. Tiana didn't hesitate. By the time she stepped into Courtroom 6B for the Raylan Cross case, she wasn't just an officer. She was a silent storm, carrying the truth, carrying proof, and carrying the power to change everything. When Belridge called her a nobody, he triggered the one clause that allowed her to act. She had walked in with 2 identities, one visible, one tucked quietly inside her blazer. And now, justice had a name. Tiana Mosley. What set Tiana apart wasn't just that she dared to confront someone in power. It was the patience with which she did it. No shortcuts, no leaks. Just a slow, deliberate march toward justice. Her father used to say, rushing justice only makes a mess. That stayed with her. She'd waited nearly 4 years for this moment, not to make a spectacle, but to make it stick. Now that the robe was off the bench, it was time to expose what Judge Belridge had been hiding, and who else had helped him keep it buried. Raylan Cross wasn't a troublemaker. He was 18, newly graduated from Bishop Luers High in Fort Wayne, working part-time at a hardware store while saving for community college. One quiet Sunday night in June, he left his girlfriend's house just before midnight. His music was low, his seatbelt buckled, every turn signal used. But just 3 blocks from home, red and blue lights lit up his rearview mirror. Officers Jackson Veras and Brian Lattimore pulled him over, claiming he rolled through a stop sign. What happened next was captured by 2 sources, a neighbor's doorbell cam and a friend watching through FaceTime. They dragged Raylan from his car without cause, slammed him against the trunk, searched the vehicle without permission, and kept him detained on the curb for nearly 40 minutes. He didn't resist. He kept asking what he'd done wrong. No answers. It might have become another forgotten stop, another story buried under paperwork, if not for the footage. Within 48 hours, it went viral. Hashtags spread. Protests began. Local news called it deeply disturbing. National coverage followed. This wasn't the first time Veras and Lattimore had been accused of excessive force, but it was the first time the evidence was undeniable. The department launched a formal review. Raylan's family filed a civil suit. Public pressure mounted, and the district attorney opened a criminal inquiry. That's when Tiana's name surfaced. She wasn't assigned to the case, but she knew the officers. Veras had been named in 2 prior misconduct complaints. Both times, the reports mysteriously vanished. Tiana had anonymously filed a memo questioning his promotion. It was ignored. So when she was asked to testify, she didn't hesitate. But she knew stepping into Judge Belridge's courtroom wasn't just about giving testimony. It meant entering the lion's den. Belridge had a pattern, not the kind that made headlines, but the kind defense attorneys whispered about. He routinely dismissed witnesses who challenged police accounts. He'd once tossed out video footage, calling it inconclusive. Defense lawyers avoided bench trials in his court for that very reason. And yet, the same officer names kept showing up in his courtroom, always getting the benefit of the doubt. Tiana had quietly tracked those patterns. She built charts, connected dots. Rulings, officers, complaints, 6 years of hidden threads. And at the center, always, sat Judge Belridge. But Raylan's case presented a new risk for Belridge. Cameras were on. Public attention was sharp. Scrutiny meant he couldn't just sweep it under the rug. Still, he tried. He ruled the doorbell video inadmissible, calling it legally unreliable. He referred to Raylan as overly emotional during pretrial hearings. When Tiana was called to provide context on the 2 officers involved, Belridge seized the chance to undermine her. He didn't see who she really was. He saw a black woman in uniform and dismissed her, not knowing the badge she carried in her blazer held the weight of a federal mandate. But Raylan's case wasn't just a traffic stop gone wrong. It was the breach. It cracked the surface and revealed the rot beneath. It was the moment Tiana had been preparing for, the moment she couldn't ignore. She had gone through every proper channel, submitted evidence to the DOJ, waded through months of clearance reviews, filed the paperwork no one else dared to. But Belridge didn't wait. His courtroom outburst wasn't just offensive, it was misconduct. And now she had the final piece. When Tiana turned and revealed her badge, it wasn't rage that moved her. It was obligation. She wasn't disrupting the court. She was executing a federal arrest order that had been sealed until the judge broke the law again. Raylan's case wasn't the beginning. It was the confirmation. The proof that everything Tiana had spent years documenting was real. And it had festered unchecked for far too long. What the public didn't yet realize was that Belridge hadn't been acting alone, and Tiana's files named more than just him. Long before he called her a nobody in uniform, Tiana had been quietly collecting evidence against him. And she wasn't working alone. Agent Corey Delgado of the DOJ had spent nearly 6 years following federal complaints tied to Indiana courtrooms. Judges approving shady deals. Defense attorneys getting sweetheart outcomes. Police officers with violent histories walking free again and again, especially in cases that landed in front of Belridge. When Delgado met Tiana, he knew she was the missing piece. She had what no one on his team did: internal access, day-to-day insights, a reputation for honesty. People trusted her. She didn't flash a badge or swagger into rooms, but she knew how to listen. And when people talk, they reveal everything. A part-time clerk told her about late-night file edits. A retired bailiff mentioned cash envelopes being handed off in bathroom hallways. One defense attorney even hinted that his client's acquittal had nothing to do with facts, and everything to do with who got paid. Tiana's evidence wasn't just about Belridge's rulings. It was about his behavior. He consistently ruled against defendants with public defenders. He dismissed civil cases from black plaintiffs at double the state average. He denied almost every motion involving officer misconduct. But the real proof wasn't in statistics, it was in the paper trail. There were altered files, missing pages, court notes, and unfamiliar handwriting. Transcripts that had never been certified. Tiana compared everything herself, printing them at home late at night, cautious not to leave digital traces at work. One of those nights, armed with nothing but her laptop and a pot of strong black coffee, she found the breakthrough. It was a forgotten civil case filed by Cassandra Bell. Her son had been beaten during a stop. The court tossed it, claiming the video was unreliable. But Tiana located the original footage buried deep on a backup server. It had been submitted properly. And the officer in question? Brian Lattimore, the same officer who stopped Raylan. The judge? Warren Belridge. Cassandra tried to refile, but legal fees bled her dry. She gave up. Tiana tracked her down using an old address. When Cassandra answered the phone, her voice cracked. "No one's asked me about that in years," she said. "I thought everyone forgot." They hadn't. Not Tiana. From there, the puzzle pieces started falling into place. Attorneys pushing for quick settlements before evidence could be reviewed. Prosecutors refusing to challenge Belridge. And the same officers, over and over, popping up in the same kinds of cases. Delgado's team built what they called the grid, a massive, wall-sized map of connections. Cases, rulings, names, dates. Tiana's files filled most of it. But what worried them the most wasn't the judge, it was how many people had looked the other way. Corruption doesn't thrive in shadows, Delgado had told her. It survives in silence. And Tiana knew the courtroom was just the stage. The real story was buried in sealed files, whispered warnings, and quietly vanished evidence. Every time Belridge raised that gavel, he did it knowing no one would challenge him. Until now. In the week before Raylan's hearing, the DOJ approved something rare: conditional arrest authority. Tiana had the green light. If Belridge crossed the line again, she didn't have to wait. And he did. She had the evidence. The witness statements. The recordings. The chain of custody. Still, she wrestled with it, not because she doubted his guilt, but because she understood what it would mean. Arresting a judge doesn't just bring down one man. It shakes an entire system. There would be backlash. Doors would close. Some would disown her. Others would pretend she'd never existed. But then she thought of Cassandra. Tiana could still hear the echoes: Raylan's voice, his sister's silence, every cry for justice that had been silenced by courtroom walls and corrupt decisions. Belridge was just the first piece. Exposing the machine behind him would require a different kind of war. But that didn't scare her. Her heels clicked crisply against the marble floor as she walked toward the bench. There were no shouts, no chaos, just her presence, calm and deliberate. In one hand, she held her federal ID. In the other, control. "Judge Warren Belridge," she said, voice steady and unshakable. "You're under arrest." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Jurors glanced at one another. Lawyers froze mid-motion. A bailiff took a cautious step forward, but paused when Tiana drew out another document, an official, signed federal warrant. Belridge's mouth parted, but no words came. His expression shifted, smugness giving way to disbelief, then anger, and finally, unmistakable fear. "You don't have the authority to," he began. "I do," Tiana interrupted. "You're being charged with obstruction of justice, conspiracy to alter court records, and accepting bribes while serving on the bench. You have the right to remain silent." She spoke the rest like it was second nature, because it was. But no one in that courtroom had ever witnessed anything like it. He rose, shaking. "This is outrageous. I'll have your badge." "You're not in charge anymore, Judge." The words didn't need volume. Their weight carried them. Reuben Keller, the bailiff who'd served in that courtroom for over a decade, finally stepped forward. After studying Tiana's badge and the warrant, he moved around the bench and handcuffed Belridge with practiced precision. The same man who had sent hundreds to prison without flinching now recoiled at the cold bite of steel around his own wrists. "Is this a joke?" Belridge rasped, voice cracking. Tiana didn't answer. Across the gallery, Assistant District Attorney Jenna Kessler sat frozen, lips moving to whisper something to her aide. He raised his phone and hit record. Others in the courtroom had already done the same. "Let the record show," Tiana said, facing the stenographer, "that this arrest is part of an active federal investigation into judicial misconduct. Supporting documentation has been submitted to the Department of Justice and action has been authorized." Reuben escorted Belridge past the jury box. His head dipped low, eyes avoiding contact. The courtroom was silent, but not the silence of confusion or shame. This was different. This was respect. Tiana didn't need backup. She didn't need applause. She had truth, and that was enough. As Belridge vanished through the courtroom doors, someone whispered, "About time." Then a woman rose from the third row. Gray cardigan, hands tied in front of her, Cassandra Bell. She had driven in from Muncie that morning after Tiana called her. She didn't know what would happen, only that something important might. She came to witness it with her own eyes. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Tiana met her gaze, and in that glance was a shared history of survival. Judge Eva Moreland, a senior federal judge, was brought in moments later to oversee the remainder of the session. Her first act, dismiss the jury. Court was adjourned, but no one moved. All eyes remained on Tiana. She exited without a word. Outside, the press had already gathered. News trucks blocked the courthouse steps. The arrest of a sitting judge, by a testifying officer no less, was unprecedented. But for Tiana, it had never been about headlines. In her unmarked car, she checked her phone. 2 missed calls from Agent Delgado. A single text. "It's done. Now we go deeper." But no one outside the building knew yet. Belridge was just the first domino. Tiana had already started setting the others in place. Before the court clerk could file the day's closing documents, the story broke. Judge arrested mid-trial. Officer exposes corruption in open court. Video of the arrest, taken from multiple angles, hit over 3 million views by morning. But it wasn't about the views. The real shift came in whispers and glances, inside the Fort Wayne Police Department, where officers who once ignored Tiana now nodded with quiet recognition. Young recruits began asking questions they once kept to themselves. Deputy Chief Neil Banning, who'd hardly spoken to her in a year, sent one line, "Took guts. Proud of you." At the courthouse, phone lines lit up. Reporters wanted statements. Defense attorneys requested case reviews. Community activists called for sweeping audits. And the families, those who had gone unheard for too long, finally felt seen. Cassandra Bell sat down with a local reporter in her kitchen. She didn't cry. She just held her son's photo and said, "Maybe now some other mother's kid won't be buried in paperwork they can't afford to fight." Behind closed doors, the Judicial Oversight Committee launched a formal review. Nearly 2,000 rulings from Belridge's past 10 years came under scrutiny. A team was formed to analyze sentencing disparities, suspiciously sealed motions, and questionable denials. Some judges who once called Belridge strict but fair quickly distanced themselves. But the strongest reaction came from within his own chamber. Glenn Masters, his longtime clerk, resigned that same afternoon. He left a handwritten note on the office door. "What I witnessed today should have happened years ago. I can't serve a system that shields men like him. Tiana didn't read the coverage. She didn't watch the videos. She sat at her kitchen table, a plate of leftover lasagna beside her, and scrolled through a spreadsheet she'd kept hidden in a secure folder for almost 5 years. Each name, each case, was a thread in a much larger web. Judge Durrell Knox in Kokomo, Prosecutor Bryce Henley in Allen County, and others. Sealed pleas, selective prosecutions. The pattern was undeniable. Earlier that day, Delgado had called again. "We're issuing the next round of subpoenas," he said. "You opened the door. We walk through it now." She said nothing, just nodded, staring at the screen. Her dog, Ruby, sat at her feet, tail flicking slowly. Across town, Raylan Cross sat with his mom, watching the news loop the arrest footage again. "So, does that mean my case is going to be different now?" he asked. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "It already is." Raylan's retrial was scheduled, this time under a new judge. The doorbell video would be admitted. Tiana would testify again. But now, she wasn't just a witness. She was a federal officer, standing for something bigger than one boy. The real test, though, hadn't even started. 3 weeks later, Tiana sat alone at a small cafe on the corner of Fairfield and Westbury. No cameras, no interviews. Just her, a black coffee, and the notebook she'd carried for 7 years. Page 2 still bore the first scribbled note about Belridge. She didn't write that day. She just turned the pages, tracing the margin notes and dog-eared edges. Reminders of every time she almost gave up. That courtroom moment had proven something she doubted for years. Silence might shield your career, but truth protects people. And people are worth the risk. Outside, a woman in her 60s stopped her. "You're the one who brought in that judge, aren't you?" she asked. Tiana paused, then nodded. The woman didn't thank her. She didn't give a speech. She simply said, "My brother spent 5 years locked up for something he didn't do. Belridge handled the case." And then she walked away. It wasn't much, but it meant everything. Because sometimes justice isn't applause. It's the quiet knowledge that a wrong was finally made right. Belridge would fight the charges, lawyer up, try to flip the narrative, claim bias or revenge. But the videos were public, the evidence unshakable, and the truth, once seen, couldn't be unseen. At a closed-door meeting weeks later, Tiana was asked to speak to a group of new federal investigators. She didn't write a speech. She told a story. She spoke about the patience justice requires, about being ignored, doubted, dismissed, about how sometimes, to stop the loudest corruption, you have to move quietly until it's time to act. She ended with something simple. Do your job with your eyes open. And if your hands shake, let them. Just don't back down. Raylan's court date approached. Officer Lattimore was under investigation. Prosecutor Vires had stepped down. An audit of Belridge's entire career was underway. And Tiana? She kept going. No headlines. No stage. Just the field, where she'd always felt she belonged. Because for her, it wasn't about revenge. It was about those who never got to speak, who were told they didn't matter. And maybe now, maybe they would. If this story struck something in you, if it reminded you why the truth matters, even when it's hard, then share it. Talk about it. Teach it. Speak even when you're afraid. Because justice doesn't move unless we push.